Hi, this is Ryan at ClovisTribe.com, and I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass. I'm going to make this short and sweet and get to the point quickly. I had a recent conversation on Facebook that was about kids being spoiled and not understanding the value of money. Somebody on my Facebook feed, somebody that I've been following, and then I guess because we have some political disagreements, they disconnected with me as friends, but I still get their little post on my feed because I'm still following them apparently. Anyway, this came up. He says, when I was young, I had a friend who was spoiled. His mom bought him a really nice guitar. He never used it. This disgusted me. I pushed my parents' lawnmower around the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if I can mow their lawn for money. I used the money to buy myself a shitty guitar, but my shitty guitar in my hands sounded better than the expensive guitar in the spoiled kids' hands. Spoiled people don't even realize how much their parents ruin them. And I agreed, and I made me a little video here to kind of illustrate my point. And this video was made the day that my grandmother died. I didn't even know she was dead, but I had mentioned her in this video, and I guess she had died just hours before this. But I had parents that were like that, that spoiled me and my siblings as much as they could. You know, they used money as kind of a replacement for love. And, you know, whenever we had some resistance or whenever Christmas came around, you know, money was the solution, it seemed like. And I don't think it did any good for any of us, honestly. Not at that point in our lives anyway. And I was lucky to move out at age 12 and, you know, get jobs and work for myself and teach myself the value of money. And I looked up to my parents. I even mentioned them in this video that they worked really hard, and that taught me a lot. But anyway, getting down to this guy here, and I'm going to try to blur these names out. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to it or not. It's a public feed, so anybody can see it, so I'm not too ashamed to use the names here. But anyway, he says, Rich, your wealth was produced in places like Democratic Republic of Congo where people make less than $1 a day. I'd really like to see how your no handouts philosophy would be received there. The fact is, white people already got massive handouts. When we argue against them now, it's to say, hey, don't give those to anyone else. And, you know, I'm not a no handouts philosophy kind of guy. I'm just saying, you know, like I said in my video here, I mean, I say helping sick people is a worthy cause as they are too sick to help themselves. But helping people that can do for themselves just makes them weak and dependent and hurts them more than it helps them, which is why we have always taught our kids to work and provide for themselves as much as possible so that they are not weak and dependent. Anyway, I replied to this guy, and he got into the depths of racism. You know, the post that this friend of mine posted was about some spoiled kid who got a guitar when he was a kid. And I guess my friend was jealous of that because he felt like, you know, he deserved more or something. I don't know. And so, anyway, when this guy Mac replies, I say, my wealth is not in money. It is in my family. However, my wealth came from Africa. How do you figure? And then I posted Dinesh D'Souza because he really puts this conquest thing into perspective. Now, pretty much all over the world for 6,000 years of written history, cultures have conquered other cultures. White, black, native, Asian, whatever, have conquered one another all over the world. I mean, Native Americans, before we ever got to this country as colonists, before Caucasians ever got here as colonists, you know, Native American tribes would genocide one another. The Comanche, Apache, the Sioux, they all tracked each other down and killed as many of their opponents as their rival tribes population as they could. Comanche would go all the way around the country, thousands of miles, looking for the last members of a tribe to genocide them out of existence. And they took slaves. Long before there was any slaves in the colonist communities or in the colonies, these Native American tribes had slaves from other colonies. Anyway, and that's what Dinesh D'Souza says. I'll put a link here in the description of this video so you can see more about it. And I said, I love how D'Souza destroys the idea of one race conquesting. You people make me laugh. Watch this for enlightenment. Also look up where the root word slave come from. It comes from when black Muslims took white Slavic people from Eastern Europe into North Africa and made them slaves. The slave trade started in Africa. And anyway, we got into it more and more. He's like, whoa, man, set down the white man's burden. No one is talking about race. So first he talks about race. He brings in how white people owe their wealth to the Democratic Republic of Congo. So he's the one that brought up white people and race, and now he's saying nobody is talking about race. I mean, the guy contradicts himself on every point, and we go through that all the way down here. I mean, seriously, all the way down here. Blah, 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 blah. He's trying to convince me that I'm wrong about where the root word slave came from. You know, when North Africans took slaves from Eastern Europe, and they were Slavic people, and that's where the word slave comes from. You know, millions of white Caucasians from Eastern Europe became slaves in North Africa, and that's where the root English word slave came from, is where Slavic people were enslaved by North Africans. And he disagrees with that. So I posted some links. I'll post them for you too. You can look this one up, even Google it, From Slavs to Slaves, and many others. And then he gets into this thing about, when the Turks were where and how and who and what, and I was wrong and this and that. And anyway, I gave him many, many, many references, factual references about, the root word of Slav meaning slave, and that's the root of it in the English language. And anyway, he disagrees. I'm like, okay, well, it's neither here nor there. That's not the point. The point is that you said white people, including myself, owe our wealth to people in the Republic of Congo. And, he's talking about, where slavery started and who started it and, who owes who what and blah, 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 reparations, this and that. And I'm talking about how slavery began in Africa. This little meme here illustrates it well. Egyptians were black. Egyptians enslaved Jews. Or whites invented slavery, reparations. I mean, the Egyptians had Jewish slaves, and this has been found in their hieroglyphics recently. People have disputed whether Jews were slaves in Africa or in Egypt, and for many years nobody knew of any sign or proof of this until recently, and they have found conclusive evidence that in fact Jews were slaves in Africa, and there's hieroglyphs, that is, that prove it. Not only hieroglyphs, but a lot of other written history and relics in Egypt that are related to Jewish ancestry. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. He keeps posting this map about the Turks and where they were and how their empire expanded and blah, blah, blah. Still not addressing how I owe my wealth or anybody else owes their wealth to people in Africa. And I say right here, I kind of illustrate this. I say, so first you say, Rich, your wealth was produced in places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where people make less than $1 a day. I'd really like to see how your, quote, no handouts, unquote, philosophy is received by them. The fact is that white people already got massive handouts. When we argue against them now, it's to say, hey, don't give those to anyone else. Then you say, whoa, man, set down the white man's burden. Nobody is talking about race. I'm talking about the fact America's wealth is built on exploitation of Africa. Even the uranium for the bombs dropped on Japan came from a mine in the DRC. I said, and you completely contradict yourself. You brought in race, and you brought up how a white man stole this and that, and you continue with it until you couldn't prove your point. Now you say you didn't bring race into this? Sorry, you were the first, son. And blah, blah, blah. He brings these maps in again. Turkey. His main thing is Turkey. My main thing is prove that I owe anybody anything. I've said over and over again that I've got my ancestry online here. You can go to houseofthompson.net. And my family was farmers and sailors and never owned any wealth. I mean, we still don't have any wealth. I don't know of any wealth my family has ever had. My family have always been hardworking people and blue collar people, but never wealthy. Not that I'm aware of. Certainly, we didn't own any slaves. Certainly, we didn't conquer any, territories. My family were just hardworking people that barely got by in life and have no wealth, but somehow we owe all of that to somebody else. Anyway, and he was saying that there is no Africans or black people in Turkey, and there never was. And I gave him this link that relates back to the Ottoman Empire, the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, where they had the big slave trade and where they took white people as slaves, and there were Afro-Turks, and there has been ever since the beginning of time in that area. Blah blah blah. And then I get into Anthony Johnson. The first slave owner in America was not a black man. He went to court and demanded it. In 1854, it was time for Anthony to release John Cassor, a black indentured servant. Instead, Anthony told Cassor he wanted to extend his time. Cassor left and became employed by the free white man Robert Parker. Anthony Johnson sued Robert Parker in the Northampton court in 1654. In 1655, the court ruled that Anthony Johnson could hold John Cassor indefinitely. The court gave judicial sanction for blacks to own a slave and their own race. Thus, Cassor became the first permanent slave, and Johnson was the first slave owner. And Anthony Johnson was a black man from Angola who sued in court to have the right to own slaves indefinitely, and he was the first legit legal slave owner in the United States, and it was his court case that set precedents for other people to be enslaved. And I made this video back in 2009 about this racial diversity thing, showing that most cultures have a history of slavery. Irish, Scottish, even some English, Ukrainian, Slavic people. Those are just the main groups of white people that were enslaved. And then there's Semitic people like Jews that were slaves. Asian people all over the world have been enslaved. Black people, of course, have been enslaved. And we all have this history of enslavement, but do we continue to perpetuate this victim mentality and dwell on it, or do we move forward, has been my point. And Anthony Johnson not only owned a black man as a slave, Anthony Johnson, as a black man, also owned 4 other white men as slaves. So, there was a lot of black slave owners that owned white slaves. This was never a racial thing. And I give those references here. And then I talk about the Irish slaves that are at risk of being scrubbed from history. There was over 1.5 million Irish slaves in this country at one time. And then that comes down to this point. They talk about the Star Spangled Banner being racist. It's almost ridiculous. It talks about slaves in the Star Spangled Banner. I just actually commented on this. I hope I can find it. Oh yeah, right here. And I said, I will actually open this up and show you. Because it's interesting, and there's certainly, a slave reference in the Star Spangled Banner in the 3rd verse, where it says, let's see, no refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And so there's no reference to which kind of slaves. And in 1812, right around the time when this was written, there were white slaves and black slaves. There was no racist connotation there. It wasn't about race. Slavery was just about slavery. It wasn't about one race or the other. There were white slaves, there were black slaves. There were 1 million white slaves. And so my final word on this, and I think we really need to get past this, I'm gonna read you what I've said on this to conclude my point, and then I'm gonna play you something by Ben Shapiro to dispel this whole Black Lives Matters movement, which I think is ridiculous. I think every race should fight for, you know, their identity, their history, their culture, you know, in a peaceful way. I think that making that point is a good point. Black Lives Matter is playing the victim when they're really not, and that's the honest truth. And I'll follow up with this point after I say this. I said, however, if we all know the history of slavery in the USA, there is this reference to, quote, slaves included white and black slaves and various others. Anthony Johnson, the man who sued to make slavery legal in 1640, I guess it was 1655, in Virginia, was a black man from Angola who had 1 black slave and 4 white slaves. It's not so, quote, black and white, and therefore not racist, just disgusting. So yeah, there was a bunch of slavery in this country, and it was disgusting. But it didn't start out racist. You know, it started out with black men from Africa bringing slaves over from Africa and making them slaves. And then also enslaving white people who came over from Celtic areas like Scotland and Ireland. It was never a racist thing. It was just slavery, and it was disgusting, absolutely. Anyway, I'll play you this little clip by Ben Shapiro to wrap it up.
I'm offended by the language of uprising applied to people who are breaking into other black people's stores and looting them. This is a lack of values, and people who are destroying private property, destroying cop cars, in an uprising against what exactly? Against the black police chief, against a mostly minority police force, against the black mayor, against the black president, against the black attorney general, against against a city council that is 9 of 15 are black and all 15 are elected Democrats. What is the uprising against? What is it seeking to achieve? I still don't see what exactly the riots are seeking to achieve. Bottom line is, this is all. It all could be boiled down to just act like a mensch. Act like a human being. Honestly, it's not useful to riot, it's not useful to break things, it's not useful to throw rocks at people. And the idea that we're supposed to sort of correlate your level of outrage.
I'm going to stick to the 30 seconds on
the
this.
last sentence. The last sentence. The idea that we're supposed to correlate your level of outrage with a certain level of justification. In other words, the more outraged you are and the more angry you are, the more justified you must be, is absolute nonsense.
How can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
Anybody can jump in. It's an open mic there.
But there has to be racism. You can't say there's no racism.
Without evidence?
No. I'm just saying that I don't know which animal. Maybe we're talking about dogs or something. I'm talking about human beings, and I'm like, human beings are most likely going to have racial prejudices. I'm just so sorry. I'm just so sorry. I don't know. I come from planet Earth.
Charles, I want to ask you a question. So your default is that when there is no evidence, racism is the deciding factor.
No, I was not saying that. I'm just saying that you're going to have sexists, you're going to have racists, you're going to have all this stuff. I mean, I'm just saying that.
I agree it exists, but the problem that I'm seeing, and this is the problem with the general conversation, is that there's no solution in simply saying there's racism out there. How does that solve anything? And when you talk about there's institutional racism, what does that mean? Show me a law that is racist in intent, and we will agree. Show me a police officer who commits a racist act like we saw in South Carolina, right, where a police officer shot a black man running away and it was obviously unjustified, and I will agree. But the idea that you can craft a narrative based on no racism because it just must be somewhere out there in the ether, that doesn't solve problems for anybody and creates more problems for people, because now they grow up in a milieu and an environment where they are told that every obstacle they face is from some shadowy, nameless, faceless group who's out to get them simply because of the color of their skin. They'll never succeed in that environment.
Anyway, and that's it. I mean, that's what this whole argument comes down to me also, is that when your whole life is you're a victim, then you'll always be a victim. You'll never rise up. You'll never overcome, because no matter what, you're a victim. And that doesn't help anything. That doesn't solve any problems. You know, we have a black president, we have a black attorney general, we have, you know, usually successful black businessmen, black senators, black congresspeople, black, you know, all kinds of surgeons and scientists, and, you know, Neil deGrasse, and, you know, all of these, Ben Carson, you know, neurosurgeon. I mean, just what obstacles do you have unless you put those obstacles on yourself? Peace.